Our World, Brief Baseline. In our timeline, the summer of 1776 marked a rupture in history. 13 colonies declared independence, survived a brutal war, and birthed a republic that would reshape the global order. The American experiment became synonymous with democracy itself, a beacon that inspired revolutions across continents, from France to Latin America to Southeast Asia. The United States grew into an economic colossus, a military superpower, the architect of the post-war international system. When we think of modernity, we think in American terms: Silicon Valley innovation, Hollywood culture, the dollar as global reserve currency, the very concept of the American dream as universal aspiration. We rarely stop to ask, what if that spark had been extinguished before it caught flame? The Divergence Point, Philadelphia, June 1776. The Continental Congress gathers in the Pennsylvania State House, but the atmosphere is fractured. Benjamin Franklin, the crucial elder statesman whose wit and gravitas might have unified the wavering delegates, died 2 months earlier from pneumonia contracted during his return voyage from London. Without Franklin's patient diplomacy, the room splinters. John Dickinson's faction, those favoring reconciliation with Britain, gains unexpected strength. The moderates, lacking Franklin's reassuring presence, cannot stomach the radical leap into the unknown. John Adams rages. Thomas Jefferson's declaration sits unread in a drawer. The vote for independence fails. By August, British reinforcements arrive in New York Harbor. General Howe offers generous terms: pardon for all rebels who lay down arms, restoration of colonial charters, a new imperial parliament where American colonies will have limited representation. Washington's army, undersupplied and already fracturing, begins to dissolve. The general himself, facing certain execution for treason if he continues, accepts exile to the frontier territories. It seems, in the moment, like common sense prevailing over foolish rebellion. The colonists are British, after all. Why destroy that inheritance over taxes and principle? The Revolutionary War ends before it truly begins. First adaptations, 1776-1820. The immediate aftermath is not tyranny, but negotiation. Britain, shaken by how close it came to losing its most valuable possessions, reluctantly modernizes. The American colonies receive seats in an expanded imperial parliament in London, not equality, but a voice. Colonial assemblies retain power over local matters. The compromise is awkward, legalistic, shot through with resentment on both sides. But it holds. The plantation economies of the South continue uninterrupted, and without an independent republic to gradually constrict the slave trade, the institution calcifies into something even more immovable. The cotton economy explodes with the Industrial Revolution, British mills devouring American cotton, profits flowing back to London and colonial merchant houses alike. Slavery expands westward with barely a political obstacle. In the North, colonial merchants chafe under British mercantilist restrictions, but find workarounds: smuggling, creative partnerships with the empire, gradual commercial reforms won through parliamentary lobbying. Cities like Boston and New York grow wealthy, but always as junior partners to London. The frontier expands slowly, regulated by crown treaties with indigenous nations that have more permanence than they would have had against an aggressive, expansionist republic. The Iroquois Confederacy maintains territorial integrity. The Ohio Valley develops under a patchwork of authorities: crown governors, trading companies, uneasy coexistence. What doesn't happen? A unifying national mythology. No Washington as father figure, no revolution to inspire others. The colonies remain culturally fragmented: New England Puritans, Southern planters, Middle Colony merchants, each with separate identities, separate grievances, all orbiting London. The cascade begins 1820-1870. By the 1820s, The absence of an American republic creates a vacuum in global political philosophy. The French Revolution, lacking the American precedent, takes an even bloodier, more chaotic path. Without the example of a stable, functioning republic across the Atlantic, European liberals have no proof of concept for democratic governance. Monarchies cling to power more successfully. The revolutions of 1848 fail more completely. Democracy remains theoretical, distrusted, associated with mob rule rather than ordered liberty. Latin America's independence movements fracture differently. Without the U.S. model, Bolívar and San Martín create systems that blend indigenous governance traditions with Spanish colonial structures and British-style constitutional monarchy. The hemisphere develops as a collection of confederation kingdoms rather than republics. Brazil's model, gradual negotiated independence within a monarchical framework, becomes the template. In British North America itself, the tension builds around slavery. The 1833 British abolition law applies to the colonies, but Southern plantation owners, represented in Imperial Parliament, negotiate exemptions, delays, compensation schemes. The issue festers for decades. Northern colonial assemblies pass local abolition laws, but the South becomes an economic and moral gangrenous limb the empire cannot amputate without losing enormous wealth. Technology develops differently. Without an independent America driving westward expansion through private land grants and railroad capitalism, the transcontinental railroad comes later, built by crown corporations with different priorities. The telegraph spreads, but controlled by British monopolies. Innovation happens, but centralized, regulated, slower. Cities grow dense along the eastern seaboard, but the interior remains relatively sparse. Homesteading laws never materialize, land remains crown property or granted to chartered companies. The society that develops is more stratified, more European in character. Class distinctions harden. The critical moment, 1861-1865. In our world, this was the American Civil War. In this timeline, it becomes the War of Colonial Dissolution. Southern colonial assemblies, frustrated by imperial restrictions on slavery and increasingly radical abolitionist sentiment in Parliament, declare secession from the British Empire in 1861. They form the Confederate States of America, a slaveholding republic finally declaring the independence the northern colonies never did. Britain faces an agonizing choice. Let the cotton colonies go and crash the textile economy, or fight a war to preserve an institution London has officially condemned. The British Empire chooses economics over ethics. After initial military expeditions fail to quickly suppress the rebellion, Parliament negotiates. The Confederacy becomes a nominally independent nation, but bound to Britain by trade treaties that make it effectively an economic colony. Slavery continues in a sovereign nation Britain cannot abolish within, only embargo, which it doesn't given cotton dependency. The northern colonies remain British, bitter at this betrayal. A generation of young men in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia watch their government choose slavery and commercial interest over principle. Radicalism spreads. Abolitionist movements merge with labor movements, socialist thought imported from Europe. The continent is now divided. Confederate states in the south, British colonies in the north, disputed western territories, indigenous nations playing powers against each other for survival. The world today, present time. Boston, British North America. January 2026. Sarah takes the Underground from her flat in Cambridge to her position at the Royal American Technology Institute. The train passes beneath streets that feel both familiar and alien to what we know. Wider, older, built for carriages before combustion engines. Above ground, Union Jacks fly alongside colonial flags. A reminder that this is still technically foreign soil to the Parliament that governs it. Her morning newsfeed scrolls across her device, manufactured in Singapore, running on a British-designed operating system. The global technology sector is centered in London, Bangalore, and Singapore. There's no Silicon Valley. California is split between Russian, British, and Mexican spheres of influence, developed late and chaotically. The lead story, negotiations between the British Commonwealth, which now includes most of North America, Australia, India, and parts of Africa in a complex federated system, and the European Monarchical Alliance. The global order is multipolar. No single superpower dominates. The British Commonwealth competes with the Franco-German Union, the Russian Empire, the Chinese Federation, the Japanese co-prosperity sphere. Democracy exists, but it's parliamentary, constrained, evolutionary, rather than revolutionary. Universal suffrage came slowly through reforms and protests and gradual concessions, not founding documents. The idea that governments derive legitimacy from the consent of the governed is accepted in some places, contested in others, never enshrined as self-evident truth. Sarah's work involves climate modeling. The global industrial revolution came later and more regulated. Crown corporations answerable to Parliament moved more cautiously than American robber barons ever did. Carbon emissions are lower, but so is overall development. Wealth inequality is different, less extreme wealth concentration in the hands of entrepreneurs, more in hereditary aristocracy and chartered companies. There was no American-style capitalism to revolutionize global markets. At lunch, she meets her brother Thomas, a journalist. He's working on a story about the Confederacy's 165th anniversary. The Confederate States, now including Cuba and parts of Central America, acquired through 19th century expansion, only abolished slavery in 1942 after losing a disastrous war with Brazil and facing complete economic collapse. The scars remain. The region is impoverished, isolationist, consumed by racial violence that the world watched happen and did little to stop. Do you ever wonder, Thomas asks, what would have happened if they'd actually voted for independence? Back in 1776? Sarah shrugs. We'd probably have had a revolution anyway, maybe a worse one. The French killed their king. We might have too. Or maybe, Thomas says, looking out at the skyline of old Boston, church spires, and crown-chartered towers, we'd have built something better than what we have, something more, ours. She doesn't answer. It's a thought many people have in quiet moments. But there's no language for it, no founding myth to reference. The revolution that never happened is just a ghost. The reflection. In our world, the American Revolution created a specific flavor of modernity. Fast, individualistic, expansionist, innovative, often brutal in its creative destruction. It gave us the language of rights, the machinery of constitutional democracy, the belief that tomorrow can be radically different from today, because we choose to make it so. In this world, modernity came slower, more cautiously, more regulated. Progress was something negotiated with power, not seized from it. Technology advanced, but through different hands, for different purposes. Democracy spread, but as a practical reform, rather than a sacred principle. What they gained? Fewer of the catastrophic swings between liberation and oppression, slower environmental destruction, stronger social safety nets, paternalistic crown welfare systems predated worker-driven reforms, more cultural preservation, less cultural imperialism. What they lost, the revolutionary optimism that ordinary people could remake their world, the economic dynamism of unfettered capitalism, the technological acceleration that American competition drove, the moral clarity of a nation theoretically founded on equality, however imperfectly realized, the very concept that all of this could have been different. The most haunting absence is psychological. They live in a world that never learned to imagine itself otherwise. The American Revolution taught humanity that political reality is constructed, not given, that governments can be overthrown, rewritten, reimagined. Without that lesson, this world accepts what is with less question. They don't miss what they never had. But we, looking at them from across the dimensional divide, recognize what's missing, The dangerous, generative belief that tomorrow doesn't have to resemble yesterday, that authority can be questioned, that the future belongs to those bold enough to claim it. Sarah and Thomas go back to work in a world that works, more or less. Stable, prosperous enough, governed by institutions with centuries of continuity. It's not dystopian. It's just constrained. A world where revolution became a ghost story, where Franklin's death in 1776 extinguished more than one man's life. And we, knowing what our own revolution birthed, both its glories and its horrors, are left to wonder, which world is better? Or is that the wrong question entirely? Perhaps the right question is, what do we take for granted that exists only because someone, somewhere, chose rupture over continuity? And what are we afraid to rupture now?